Hi everyone, welcome to Jawaras. In this video, we are going to talk about bean life cycle. So we have few callbacks or few life cycle callbacks for a bean in a Spring context. First is initialization callback. So if you want to perform any action after your bean has been initialized, then you can use initialization callback. There is another callback, destruction callback, which is used to do something, perform some action, release some resources just before your bean is about to destroy, or whenever the Spring IOC container which holds your bean is about to be closed or about to be destroyed, then this destruction callback is used. Now, first, let's talk about initialization callback. So, as I have already mentioned, it is used to perform some actions whenever the bean has been created. So, there are different ways in which we can use initialization callbacks. First is using initializing bean interface. Second is using init method attribute. Third is using post construct annotation, and the fourth is using init method attribute of bean annotation. So the last two options we will look at them later when we will talk about annotation based configuration and Java based configuration. For now we will only look at the first two options to use initialization callback. So let's look at initializing bean interface. I have already created a project, and in the pom.xml file I have specified to use Java version 17 and Spring Dot version is 6.0.11. This is a custom property, and I have already added a Spring context dependency with the Spring Dot version which we have mentioned in this property. And then we have two classes. First is main class, which is inside main package. So this is the starting point of our application. Another class is author repository, which is inside repositories package, and we will create bean of this class. And we have beans.xml configuration file. So this is empty configuration file. So let's do something in main. So first of all, I will just print out hello to see if the project is working on. And we can see hello being printed here. That means it's working. So now let's create a bean of type author repository. Bean class will be author repository. And let's create an application context here. So application context will class path application context, since we are using XML file to define beans, and the name of the file is beans.xml, and we can get the bean of type author repository from context, or this is fine because whenever we create a context all the beans will be initialized, because by default the bean creation is eager. That means whenever we create a Spring container all the beans will be initialized, and we want to do something on initialization of author repository bean. So first let's run this method, and we see nothing is being printed on the console. So in the author repository, let's say we want to um, connect to database whenever the bean of author repository is created. So for that we can use initializing bean interface. So let's do that. So this will implement initializing bean interface, and this bean has one method which we need to implement, and the method name is after properties set. So this method will be initialized, or this method will be invoked after all the properties, that means all the constructor arguments or all the dependencies have been injected into the author repository. So for now we will just print out something, let's say establishing database connection, and let's run it again. Now we can see establishing database connection is being printed here, because we are creating application context here, and whenever we create application context it creates beans of all the classes defined inside this context. That means inside this beans.xml file, and inside beans.xml file we have defined one Okay, what happened? It. And inside bean.xml, we have defined bean definition here. So this bean will be created, and at the creation time, this method will be invoked because of initializing bean interface. Now, there is a problem with this approach. If we use this, then our this service or repository, that means business logic, is tightly coupled with Spring Framework. So we need to use Spring Framework and its interfaces in a Spring Framework here. So that's not a good choice. So to decouple the code with Spring Framework, we can use init method attribute or post construct annotation or init method attribute of bean annotation. But we will only look at init method attribute in this video. This last two will be discussed in later videos. So let's look at init method attribute. So now we can remove this and we can remove initializing bean interface as well. And we don't need to override any method now. Let's create a method here. So let's say public void init and let's say something establishing database connection init method. So we want to print this whenever we create a bean of type author repository. So if we run it now, you won't see anything because this is just a regular method and sorry, this is just a regular method and we have not yet told Spring to use this method after initializing. What we can do is we can use init method attribute here and we can pass the name of the method. So this method should not take any arguments and it should be void. So this should be a signature, public void and name of the method. The name can be anything and the same name we need to supply here. In that case, after successful bean creation of author repository, this init method inside author repository class will be invoked on that bean. So if we refresh or restart it now, we can see the message being printed here. So these are the two ways. Now let's I've already discussed how to use initializing bean interface and how to use init method attribute in order to perform some action at the initialization after initializing the bean. Now let's look at destruction callbacks. So if you want to do something or let's say you want to close database connection, you want to release some resources after the bean or the container which consists that bean is destroyed, then you can use destruction callbacks. Again, there are four options if you want to use destruction callbacks. First is using disposable bean interface. Second is using destroy method attribute. Third is using pre-destroy annotation. And the fourth is using destroy method attribute of bean annotation. Similarly, we will look at the last two in the upcoming videos. In this video, we will look at disposable bean interface and destroy method attribute. So let's see how do we do that. To use disposable bean interface, we just implement disposable bean, and if we implement disposable bean, we need to override one method which is destroy. That means we need to implement this method, and here we can do anything before destruction of the bean. So let's say you want to release some resources, you want to close the database connection, or whatever you want, you can do that here. And in the bean definition, you don't need to write anything; it will just work. Let's do that. So I will go to author repositories Java and implement was the disposable bean interface. Disposable bean, and we need to implement one method called destroy. Let's print out closing database connection. And if we just run it, you will see it's not here. So what we need to do in order for this in order to destroy this bean, we need to destroy the container. which holds that bean. So this is the container or application context. We need to destroy it. So we context dot close. But you can see close method is not available on application context. This is available on configurable application context. So if you look at the configurable application context Java doc, you can see application context is one of its super interface. That means it has all the functionalities which are inside application context, and apart from that it provides us some methods, like one of them is close. So if we call this close method on a configurable application context, it closes this application context, releasing all resources and locks that the implementation might hold. So instead of application context, I will just say configurable application context, and I will run it again. Now you can see when we are doing context.close. So let's comment it out and run it. So this time we don't see the message which is inside destroy method, but if we uncomment it, that means when we close the context, it will close the application context and it will destroy all the beans. So restart it again and we can see closing database connection being printed here. So that is one way. Now in this way also, our business logic is tightly coupled with Spring framework, but and we don't want that. So what we can do is we can remove this here and we can use destroy method attribute. So in this case, we can create any method. So the name can be anything. It's not necessary to have the name as destroy. It can be anything. And the same method name we need to mention in destroy method attribute. So let's do that. So let's remove this override. So and we want to use the same destroy method, and let's change the message. So connection destroy method attribute. And if we run it again, the message is not being printed because we have not told Spring IOC container to use or to invoke this method before destroying the bean. Let's do that. So here we can say destroy method will be destroy. And if we run it again, you can see closing database connection using destroy method attribute. So that's working fine. Now there is one thing called default initialization and destroy methods. Let's say you have many beans in your bean definition and you want to you have two methods. One is for initialize, one is init method, second is destroy method, and what you want is the init method should be invoked for each bean just after initialization, and the destroy method should be invoked for each bean just before destroying the bean. So we don't want to specify init method and destroy method for each bean. What you want is whatever bean definition we have inside this beans tag, all beans should have this init method as init and destroy method as destroy. So what we can do, we can remove it. If we run it again, don't see anything. We can put that here. So what we can do is default init method, and let's say init, and default destroy method, let's say destroy, and run it again, and you can see this is working fine. So let's say we have another repository or another service. Let's say new Java class service service, and inside it we have only one method which is called, let's first go, let's say we have only init method, we don't have desktop method. So in that and let's print service and create a bean of type service service, and let's run it. So you can see this is the init method message from author repository, and this is the message from init method of author service. So because we have specified default init method, so that method will be invoked for each bean. Given that this method exists in that bean, if the method is not there, it won't do anything. For example, we have specified default destroy method is destroy, but author service doesn't have any method called destroy, so it will be ignored for author service. So that's it, everyone. We will meet in the next video. Until then, keep learning.